This is chapter 73. As soon as he had the herd well settled, Dish decided to see if there was anything he could do for Lorena. It had been months since the afternoon in Lonesome Dove when he had got so drunk, and in all that time he had not even spoken to her. He was out of practice, in fact, had never been in practice, though that was not his fault. He would cheerfully have talked to Lorena all day and all night, but she didn't want it, and they had never exchanged more than a few words. His heart was beating hard, and he felt more fearful than if he were about to swim a swift river as he approached her tent. Gus had set up the tent before he left, but it was supper time, so Dish got a plate of beef for Lorena's supper. He took his responsibilities so seriously that he had tried to pick out the best piece, in the process holding up the line and irritating the crew, none of whom were the least impressed with his responsibilities. "That gal don't need beefsteak. She can just eat you if she's hungry, Dish," Jasper said. "I expect you'd make about 3 good bites for a woman like her." Dish flared up at Jasper's insulting tone, but he had the plate in his hand and was in no position to fight. "I'll settle you when I come back, Jasper," he said. "You've provoked me once too often." "Hell, you better run for the border then, Jas," Soupy Jones said. "With a top hand like Dish after you, you won't stand a chance." Dish had to mount holding the plate, which was awkward, but no one offered to help. "Why don't you walk?" Pocampo suggested. "The tent is not very far." That was true, but Dish preferred to ride, which he did, managing not to spill any of Lorena's food. She was sitting just inside the tent, with the flaps open. I've come with some food," Dish said, still on his horse. "Not hungry," Lorena said. "I'll wait till Gus gets back." It seemed to Dish that she was as grudging in her tone as ever. He felt foolish sitting on a horse holding a plate of beefsteak, so he dismounted. "Gus is after them horse thieves," he said. "He might not be back for a day or two. I'm supposed to look after you." "Send Newt," Lorena said. "Well, he went too," Dish said. Lorena came out of her tent for a moment and took the plate. Dish was paralyzed to be so close to her after so many months. She went right back into the tent. "You don't need to stay," she said. "I'll be all right." "I'll help you with the tent in the morning," he said. "Captain said we're to ease on north." Lorena didn't answer. She closed the flaps of the tent. Dish walked back toward the campfire, but he stopped about halfway and staked his horse. He didn't want to go back to camp, even to eat, for he would just have to box Jasper Fant if he did. It was full dusk, but to his irritation, Lippy spotted him and came walking over. "Did you get a chance to look at her, Dish?" Lippy asked. "Why, yes," Dish said. "I delivered her supper, if you don't mind." "Is she still as beautiful?" Lippy asked, remembering their days together at the Dry Bean, when she had come down toward noon every day. He and Xavier would both wait for her, and would feel better just watching her walk down the stairs. "Why, yes," Dish said, not wanting to discuss it, though at least Lippy had spoken respectfully. "Well, that Gus, he would end up with her," Lippy said. "Gus is too sly for the girls." "I'd like to know what you mean by that," Dish said. "I seen him trick her once," Lippy said, remembering the extraordinary wager he had witnessed. "He offered to cut the cards for a poke, and he won. Then he paid her $50 anyway, and he paid me 10 not to tell Jake. He didn't pay me nothing not to tell you, though, Dish," Lippy added. It occurred to him suddenly that Gus might consider that they had breached their bargain. $50? Dish said, genuinely astonished. He had never heard of such extravagance in his life. Did he actually pay it? "Well, he gave me the 10, Lippy said. "I imagine that he gave Laurie the 52. Gus ain't cheap. He's just crazy." Dish remembered the night before he had hired on with the Hat Creek outfit, when Gus had lent him $2 for the same purpose on which he had apparently spent 50. There was no figuring the man out. "You oughtn't to have blabbed," he told Lippy. I ain't told nobody else, Lippy said, realizing himself that he shouldn't have blabbed. Lippy soon went back to the wagon, subdued by his own indiscretion, but not before assuring Dish that the story would go no further. Dish unsaddled his horse and got his bedroll. He lay on the blanket all night, his head on his saddle, thinking of Lori, wondering if his chance with her would ever come. The Kansas sky was thickly seeded with stars. He listened to the Irishmen sing the sad songs that seemed to soothe the cattle. He spent the whole night thinking about the woman in the tent nearby, imagining things that might happen when they finally came to Montana and were through with the trail. He didn't sleep, or want to sleep, for there was no telling when he would get the chance to spend another night close to her. His horse grazed nearby on the good grass, which grew wet with dew as the morning came. Dish saddled a little before sunup and rode out to look at the herd, which was perfectly peaceful. Then he went to the wagon, ignoring Jasper and Soupy, who were as insolent as ever. He wanted to teach them both a lesson, but he couldn't afford the time. The herd had to be set moving, and somebody would have to hold the point. It was a ticklish problem, for he couldn't hold the point and help Lori, too. He fixed a plate for Lorena and just grabbed a hunk of bacon for himself. "Why, look at him. He's taking her breakfast," Jasper said. "Dish, you're so good at toting food. You ought to work in a hotel." Dish ignored this sally and walked over to the tent with a plate of food. He was hoping she would be in a talking mood. All night as he had lain awake, he'd thought of things he might say to her, things that would make her see how much he loved her, or convince her how happy he could make her. If he could just get her talking for 5 minutes, he might have the opportunity to change everything. But when he walked up to the tent, Lorena was already standing outside it, buttoning her shirt. She turned, and he stopped and blushed, fearful that he had ruined everything by approaching at the wrong time. All the speeches he had practiced in the night left him at once. "I brought you your breakfast," he said. Lorena saw that he was embarrassed, although she had only the top button to go on her shirt. It was just a second of awkwardness, but it brought back memories of her old life and reminded her how it had once pleased her to embarrass men. They might pay her, but they could never really get their money's worth for being embarrassed. She had only to look them in the eye for it to happen. It was her revenge. It didn't work on Gus, but there were precious few like Gus. "I'll take down the tent while you eat," Dish said. Lorena sat on her saddle and ate. It took Dish only a few minutes to roll up the tent and carry it to the wagon. Then he came back and saddled her horse for her. "I've got to ride to the point," he said. "Just follow along with the wagon. Lippy and the cook will look after you. If you need anything, send for me." "I need Gus," Lorena said. "I wish he hadn't left. You think he'll come back?" "Oh, why, of course he will," Dish said. It was the friendliest she had ever talked to him, though it was about Gus. "I get shaky," she said. "Gus knows why. I hope he gets back tonight." "It depends on how big a start the horse thieves had," Dish said. The day passed, and there was no sign of Gus. Lorena rode close to the wagon. Every few minutes, Lippy turned and looked back at her as if he had never seen her before. Almost every time he did, he tipped his hat, which was even filthier than it had been when he worked in the saloon. Lorena didn't acknowledge him. She remembered how he had always tried to look up her skirts when she came downstairs. She just rode along, watching the horizon to see if she could spot Gus returning. The horizon shimmered, so that it would have been hard to see Gus in any case. They crossed a little creek about noon. There were a few scraggly bushes growing along the line of the creek. Lorena didn't pay them much attention, but Pocampo did. When the herd had moved on, he came walking over to her, his sack half full of wild plums. "These plums are sweet," he said, handing her a few. She dismounted and ate the plums, which indeed were sweet. Then she walked over and washed her face in the creek. The water was green and cold. "Snow water," Pocampo said. "I don't see no snow," she said. "It comes from up there," Bocampo said, pointing west, "from those mountains you can't see." Lorena looked but could only see the brown plain. She ate a few more of the wild plums. "I've been finding onions," Poe said. "That's good. I'll put them in the beans." Wish she'd find Gus, she thought. But of course that was impossible. They rode into the dusk, but Gus did not return. Soon after the herd was bedded, Dish came and unrolled the little tent. He could tell from Lorena's face that she was sad. She had unsaddled, and she sat by her saddle in the grass. It pained him to see her look so alone and so tired. He tried to think of something to say that might cheer her up, but the words had deserted him again. They always seemed to desert him just when he needed them most. "I guess those horse thieves had a big start on them," he said. "He could be dead," Lorena said. "No, not Gus," Dish said. "He's had lots of experience with horse thieves. Besides, he's got the captain with him. They're expert fighters." Lorena knew that. She had seen Gus kill the Kiowas and the buffalo hunters, but it didn't ease her fears. She would have to lie in the tent all night worrying. A bullet could hit anyone, she knew, even Gus. If he didn't come back, she would have no hope of protection. "Well, I'll always help if you'll let me," Dish said. "I'll do about anything for you, Lori." Lorena knew that already, but she didn't want him to do anything for her. She didn't answer, and she didn't eat either. She went into the tent and lay awake all night while Dish Boggett sat nearby, keeping watch. It seemed to him he had never felt so lonely. The mere fact that she was so close, and yet they were separate, made the loneliness keener. When he had just thrown his blanket down with the boys, he didn't imagine her so much, and he could sleep. Now she was just a few yards away. He could have crept to the tent and heard her breathing, and yet it seemed he would never be able to eliminate those few yards. In some way, Lori would always be as distant from him as the Kansas stars. At times, he felt that he almost rather not be in love with her, for it brought him no peace. What was the use of it, if it was only going to be so painful? And yet, she had spoken to him in a friendly voice only that day. He couldn't give up while there was a chance. He lay awake all night with his head on his saddle, thinking of Lori, not sleeping, nor even wanting to.